You could use a lot of words to describe true Aussie. Genuine, passionate, trustworthy. But our name says it all. True Aussie. Truly Australian. With wide open spaces, rich and protected pastures, Australia is the ideal home for growing happy and healthy animals year-round. There's peace of mind knowing that Australian beef is unbeatable on safety and quality. To put it simply, there's pure enjoyment in every bite of Australian beef. Now the entire world can taste the greatest beef produced on the planet. Our food, your table. Truly Australian.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to present at Match Meat Series. My name is Edwina Clowes and I'm the Manager of Sustainability Frameworks and Stakeholders at Meat and Livestock Australia. And my co-presenter is Jenny O'Sullivan. Jenny's a beef and sheep producer from Gippslands in Victoria and a passionate advocate for sustainable agriculture. We've been asked today to present on sustainability and carbon neutrality in the Australian livestock industry. And I'd like to focus on three key programs that the Australian livestock industry and our research, development and marketing body, Meat and Livestock Australia, are focused on. And they are the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, the Australian Sheep Sustainability Framework, and CN30, which is the Australian livestock industry's commitment to becoming carbon neutral by 2030. And my co-presenter, Jenny, she'll be speaking on sustainability and carbon neutrality and what it means on farm, the tools and the practices that she and her husband Paul have trialled and tested, what's worked, what hasn't, what they've adopted, what that's meant in terms of sustainability, productivity and profitability on farm, the market opportunities they're looking at and what other market opportunities they're currently benefiting from. So sustainability is a very, very big, broad topic. It covers the globe, it covers all industries, all sectors, all countries, all continents. The Australian livestock industry is absolutely committed to Australia's contribution to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And sustainability for us, for the Australian livestock industry, means the production and the processing of our livestock and red meat in a way that's environmentally, economically and socially sustainable for our people, for our animals and for our natural resources today and for future generations. And it's those three threads of sustainability, the economic, the environmental and the social, that are intrinsically linked. Because you can't be economically sustainable if the practices you want your producers to enforce will send them bankrupt. And you can't be socially sustainable if we can't provide enough food to support and feed our customers and consumers in our community. And you can't be environmentally sustainable if the practices that you put in place will destroy our planet and our natural resources. Our country, Australia, is the biggest country, the biggest driest country, the biggest driest continent in the world. It's an extensively arid and semi-arid landscape of variable climates and at times very extreme conditions of weather and drought. In fact, 81% of Australia is broadly defined as rangelands, and our livestock producers are the custodians of over half of our land mass. So climate change is the biggest individual driver for our livestock industry and for production variability in Australia. And our industry has to adapt its management practices to be able to reflect these dramatically changing climatic conditions. And this comes at a time when our rangeland systems are becoming increasingly important as a food source and a potentially powerful carbon sequestration sink. But the Australian livestock industry has proven that it's resilient and it's responsive to our customers and our investors. We've radically improved the eating quality and the tenderness of our product, and that's been the result of Meat Standards Australia's objective grading system, and that's improved the prospects for our industry. It's created stable demand and stable prices for our industry. More recently, we've radically improved the flavour and the taste of our product, and that's been through our commitment to our grass-fed rangelands production systems and our really careful management practices. And so now we've set some really, really ambitious targets between now and 2030, and they are to double the value of Australian red meat sales and to be the trusted source of the highest quality protein by 2030, to be recognised as world leaders in animal health, welfare and production practices, to be carbon neutral, our livestock industry to be carbon neutral by 2030, and to be world leaders in agricultural, environmental management and stewardship practices. And the backbone of sustainability for the Australian livestock industry are our two frameworks, the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework and the Australian Sheep Sustainability Framework. These frameworks have been developed and driven and led by industry to meet our changing expectations of our customers and our investors around sustainability to meet future market opportunities. And those main areas that we are focusing on are minimising invasive animal husbandry practices and improving animal welfare, carbon neutrality, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and renewable energy focus, and natural capital, biodiversity, and improving our drought and risk resilience. And these frameworks have been informed by the highest standards and principles around materiality, around stakeholder inclusiveness and stakeholder responsiveness. And this gives them the absolute rigour and integrity that makes them absolutely defensible. So the Australian Beef Sustainability Framework, as you'll see, is centred around the four key themes of animal welfare, economic resilience, environmental stewardship, and people and community. And within those four themes, we have identified 10 priority areas, 23 priority issues, and 50 metrics to track the progress against the standards and the data. The Sheep Sustainability Framework too has four key themes, and they are caring for our sheep, enhancing our environment and climate, again, looking after our people and our communities and our customers, and again, securing and ensuring sustainable financial stability for our industry. And again, within the sheep framework, you'll see that we've captured 9 focus areas, 21 priority issues, and 58 indicators to track progress against standards and metrics. And so the role of these frameworks is to monitor, to measure and report on industry progress against these sustainability priorities. They're not there to regulate, they're not there to set goals or policies or targets, and they're not there to prescribe particular auditing or certification practices for businesses. But rather, by connecting the whole of the supply chain to each other and to connecting to new business and market opportunities, the frameworks will enable industry and industry itself to drive performance and progress rather than having it mandated against it. So we're achieving some pretty big goals, we believe. The Australian Sheep Sustainability Framework is scheduled to be officially launched on the 21st of April this year, and this is the first sheep meat and wool sustainability framework globally. So exciting news for our Australian industry. The Beef Sustainability Framework, it's now in its 5th consecutive year, and it's made some substantial progress against a number of its milestones. We're free essentially of all the major world exotic diseases. The livestock industry and red meat industry, as I've mentioned, reduced its emissions of greenhouse gas emissions by 56.7% since baseline year 2005. And we've made some progress and movement away from the aversive animal husbandry practices by investing in new science and technology and genetics when it becomes available, and increasingly increasing the uptake of pain relief by producers when undertaking animal husbandry practices. Our new exciting piece of technology is the balance of grass and tree cover dashboard. This will enable producers for the first time to accurately measure the changes in woodland and grass cover at a regional and individual property level, so protecting their biodiversity. So climate remains the biggest individual driver for our livestock industry and production variability. and managing climate change is absolutely critical. Much of our land mass, as I've mentioned, can't sustain any other food production systems, and it's becoming increasingly important and capable of being able to sequester significant amounts of carbon in our soils and vegetation, and in turn offsetting national greenhouse gas emissions. And the livestock industry, we believe, has already made some significant progress. Agriculture is achieving the most significant reductions of any emissions of any industry in Australia. And the livestock industry is making the biggest contributions to emissions reductions of any agricultural industry. So CN30 is our most critical piece of work for our industry and for our nation. And the good thing is that our CSRO modelling is demonstrating that we can maintain our livestock numbers and keep to our commitment of doubling the value of our red meat sales, while still supporting our goal and target of reducing emissions to neutral by 2030. And this is all within management practices and technology that we currently have available for adoption or is under investigation. So to go the next step to achieve neutrality by 2030, MLA has invested in some big science and technology. These include red Asparagopsis and 3-NOP that once commercialised and rolled out across our extensive rangeland system are capable of reducing emissions by as much as 90%. MLA has already also developed the CN30 roadmap. So this is to enable producers to capitalise on these emerging carbon markets. And the roadmap sets out for industry and for enterprise level the pathways and the tools and the practices they need to reduce their emissions, to capture carbon storage, and the tools that enable producers to be able to calculate their emissions and their sequestration. So I hope that gives you a really brief synopsis of what the Australian livestock industry is doing, our pathway to becoming sustainable and carbon neutral, our commitments to achieving that, and the exciting progress that we believe we've made to date. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and it really gives me great pleasure now to hand you over to our co-presenter, Jenny O'Sullivan, who's going to be talking about carbon neutrality and sustainability at a farm level and what it means. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Edwina. Yes, I wanted to give you the perspective from the farmer and what all this means. So we're farming in South Gippsland in Victoria, so we're almost the southernmost point of mainland Australia. We've got 664 hectares. We're probably grazing about 85% of that, and we have 15% set aside either for bush, shade and shelter, or houses and sheds and things. We run about 2,200 ewes that lamb down and about 450 breeding cows. The meat that we produce from our farm each year feeds about 10,500 people if you look at the average consumption. And for us, most of our meat is actually sold domestically, but for Australia, 70% of the meat that's produced actually goes export. And so our export markets are very, very important to us as an industry. So we think about animal welfare every single day. It's actually critical for us that our animals are well fed, they've got food, clean water, that they're safe, have a low stress environment, and they're healthy and happy. So you can see in that bottom photo there, they're our ewes that are lambing. We lamb in August. We scan all our ewes when they're pregnant to see whether they're having singles, twins, or triplets. And then we divide them into different mobs so that we can put them on pastures to feed them appropriately for their pregnancy. So you can see in that paddock, there's lots of twins. So this is the twin mob. And we will on average get about 150% lambing percentage from our ewes. And you can see the cattle up the top there, we're calving cattle. We get about 95% calves for the cows that we have. Again, both the cows and the sheep are raised in a very natural environment where they're calving in a paddock with their peers. It's a very safe environment. With the cattle, we'll check them twice a day. Paul drives around to check that there's no cows having any problems. And they're calving out in the paddock in a very natural environment. It's interesting stress. Edwina mentioned Meat Standards Australia, or MSA, and Australia's been using that as a quality system for 20 years now, and it's been really valuable so that through the whole supply chain, we can know what it takes to produce a quality animal. I mean, if you want a Rolls Royce, or if you want a top quality steak, every step of the way, we have to do the right thing to ensure quality. So it comes to us with the genetics that we're selecting, the nutrition that we feed our animals on farm, the stress on farm, how they're processed, and then how that meat's stored and handled. And so that we're making sure that everyone in the supply chain is doing the absolute best that we can deliver a really quality product to you. And you can see Paul there holding some clover in his hand, which is a legume, which is again very, very important. The legumes actually produce nitrogen in the soil, so that will help the grass grow. They're also very high protein. So again, for young stock or stock with high requirements, it makes an enormous difference. And through the north of the state, there's been a lot of research in different legumes that they can grow. And again, the legumes can have an impact on reducing carbon emissions because they are more nutritious for the animals. It's interesting as far as carbon emissions, if we could stop the methane, it's actually animals are burping and it's an inefficiency. It actually happens naturally with ruminants. But if we can stop that, and that carbon actually goes towards growth, we could turn off our calves probably about 2 months earlier. So there's pretty exciting, this opportunity with the research that we're doing, that we can actually produce our animals more efficiently and actually have a less environmental impact. So that's what we're trying to do, and there's some really exciting opportunities coming from the research. As far as the environment, we've got to consider the land, the soil, the water, and the air. So you can see in the bottom left there, that's my daughter 20 years ago in a gully on the farm. We don't have any permanent waterways, but in the winter when it floods, we have an enormous amount of water that moves through the landscape. And it was taking the soil and eroding this gully. So what we did is we fenced it off, and you can see up the top there with the beautiful trees providing beautiful shelter for our sheep. By fencing that off and fencing with remnants, we've created fantastic shelter for our livestock. And I went into the creek just a few weeks ago to take this photo on the right. And you can see we've got lots of eucalyptus, which is a fantastic habitat for our koalas and our possums. And I was very excited to see that fern, which is naturally regenerated and will grow into a beautiful tree fern. So by setting aside these areas where the water can erode, we actually create benefits for our animals as well. So it's a win-win for nature and productivity. Water quality is really, really important. And it's interesting, with the changing climate, we've actually invested in quite a lot of money in water infrastructure around the farm to ensure that we're waterproof, even if we have series of droughts, that we can actually still supply water to our animals. And as far as air pollution, well, that's all about the work with methane and carbon emissions. So one of the other things we really value is the biodiversity. We are lucky that was a significant amount of bush on our farm, and we have fenced that off to protect it. You can see on the top left there with some of our family are standing in these grass trees that are absolutely magnificent. They grow 1 centimetre a year, and we've got some that are over 3 metres tall. So really valuable vegetation that we want to protect. And you can see this little koala down the bottom here. When we're planting trees, we're always planting for the wildlife, and we're planting for the wildlife that they can thrive. This little koala was just in our yard the other day. So they're still very active, very healthy, and lots of kangaroos as well. So it's interesting with climate change, it is affecting us in how we farm, and we've had to adapt. So we've changed our time of lambing because we were getting drier summers, and it was impacting on how finished the animals were. So we've brought the lambing forwards. Certainly right across Australia, there's have to been a lot of adaptation as the seasons change and the rainfall changes. And we need good science to do that. We need best practice to do that. And we're lucky that we have a feedlot industry as well, that when you are out of feed on the farm, you need to sell your stock. They can go into feedlots to make sure they have a balanced nutritious diet, and we can actually produce a really quality product. And we've got about 24.7 million livestock across Australia, and about 4.5% of cattle are in feedlots at any one time. And that's the finishing process to produce the top quality product. It's interesting to look at how large a country Australia is. On the left, you've got Europe. On the right, you've got Asia. And it's a very, very big country and very, very different environments that we will see up in the north, the hot and dry, and down south where we are very wet. So for farmers, we need to look at what sustainability is and embrace best practice. But what's best practice for us in the south might be quite different in the north. And that's where it's so important that we've got good research, good information for farmers about what best practice is. The industry, I think last year invested about 12.3 million in environmental management research and about 14.5 million in animal welfare. So we really are aiming to be the best in the world. We want really good quality systems to ensure we can produce the best quality product with the lightest footprint. And we really want it as an industry to be sustainable. It needs to be profitable for our farmers, but we need to produce a quality product for our customers. So it really is all in the eating. And I think that's what you're looking for too for your customers. So you can rest assured if you're buying Australian beef or lamb, you know that we have good systems underpinning us. We are aiming to be the world's best with everything that we do. If you want to have a look at the beef sustainability framework, that's the website there. The sheep sustainability framework website will be launched once it's launched later this year. So thank you for listening to us. Edwina and I'd love to take any questions. Thank you.
When people ask me about what does sustainability mean, to me there's three assets. There's the financial sustainability, the environmental side, and also the people side. I think the profitability comes about because we've got healthy, well-performing animals. That's what drives the bottom line. And so it's in our best interest to look after the animals, feed them well, and that's what I think about all the time.
And I came back to farm in partnership with Mum and Dad in 1991, and we were quite concerned with the soil that was moving on the farm. So one of the first things Paul and I did was to fence out the creek and to revegetate it. It was quite important to get native trees and grasses back so that we can keep the soil in place. And we actually have seen that the creek rebuild, and we actually now don't have big gullies, and we've got an amazing shade and shelter for our livestock and biodiversity for the wildlife. We leave the preserved and protected native vegetation, and we've got some fantastic different types of vegetation. And we're also having a pretty extensive tree planting with shelter belts in our paddocks, because we see that shade and shelter for livestock is very important. And we also see preserving the bush that we have is really important for the biodiversity, because it's pretty precious.
It's a unique business. We love being on the farm. We love the animals, that's what we do it. We love the environment we work in. I tell all my friends in the city I've got the best office that anyone could imagine, really, when you get outside. Yeah, no, it's what we do, we love it.